father had a lot of records, and before I went to school, when I was at home with my mum, who worked from home during my first few years, I just used to spend all day playing my dad's records.
Right, and when you say he had a lot of records, you mean he had a lot of records?
Not a lot in the way that I have a lot now, but it was a lot to me at that age.
And what was he buying? What were you listening to?
Well, typical stuff that I guess he's kind of generation were into. Rhythm and blues, a lot of reggae, a little bit of country, a little bit of rock and roll. From an early age, I used to sneak records home while I was at school, because I started buying a lot of records then, and I had to sneak them past my mum because she was getting slightly concerned. Records that I can remember kind of being quite sort of powerful to me were things like, for instance, Galaxy of Love by Crown Heights Affair. Something like that would have been in with my sort of very first exposure to sort of jazz funk, because to me that's a very jazz funk record still.
Yeah.
You know, more than just a disco record. And things like High Tension, Real Thing, Can You Feel the Force, you know, just really good sort of solid records. Those are the things that were sort of in the charts at the time, and they were the sort of things I was listening to and thinking, yeah, this is good. When I sort of stepped up my record buying, that would have been in the sort of the 80s boogie area, so we'll say that's between 81 and say 83. There was a real shift in the music. There are a lot of records which, for instance, came out at the end of 1982, which couldn't have come out at the end of 83. Things were so different then. That was probably one of my sort of favourite eras, really. I stopped counting them a long time ago, but there was a time when every spare penny went on records, and there are a lot of people out there who have been like that, but I managed to get out before the going got too bad. I don't really buy many records anymore. I tend to buy more CDs, but I do still buy the odd bit of vinyl.
Do you if you do want a piece of vinyl, do you trade with people?
Yeah,
That's
trade.
Yeah.
And I spend, sadly, most of the things that I do want tend to be quite expensive. I don't get quite as crazy about things now. I mean, you know, there are things that I still want, there are things that I would pay for, but I don't go around shouting from the, rooftops about it now. I just don't bother.
Is there kind of like a, you know, I think for those of us who operate on a far sort of more primitive and elementary level in terms of buying, and I come from a DJing perspective, so I buy as a DJ. Are there sort of I always kind of imagine that there's like an Illuminati of record collectors at a high level who all sort of compete with each other, and
there are such folks. There's there's an almost kind of Masonic level of record collecting, and I'm definitely not at that level, never have been and never will be, because there are some pretty major players, and even by a good collector's standards, there are just some guys out there who just get the craziest stuff, and you just don't know where it comes from, how they get it, and they carry on getting the stuff. Those kind of people I stay well clear of.
What do we got here? Put into the camera a little bit so we can see it. Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers.
Mosaic. Just a record that, when I heard it, I knew that there was something that I was looking for in jazz, which was in this record.
How old were you when you first heard it?
I was about 20.
Right.
So, last week.
That long ago?
Yeah. But I just found it very exciting and spirited and fiery, and you know, as like someone who used to play drums, I've always been into drummers. I'd never really checked out Blakey, and I just heard this thundering solo in the middle of it, and it was just like, well, thunder. And that kind of changed my course as far as jazzy things went. It kind of pushed me further back.
So before this record, you had an interest in jazz, but it was just kind of passing interest.
It was more, you know, sort of funky stuff,
right.
fusion.
Right.
You know, I used to be quite big into the sort of prestige, you know, sort of Van Gelder, funky stuff. Didn't have many straight records, you know, but yeah, this was something of an entrance into the sort of proper world of bebop. Blakey was a pretty prolific artist. He put out a lot of records, a lot. So he was obviously doing something right.
And did you collect a lot about Blakey after this? Was it sort of like
yes.
Was it a gateway drug?
Yeah, and basically I ended up having far too many Blakey albums, because there is such thing as too many Blakey albums. You only need about 10. With Claremont 56, I had to approach it from the sort of Claremont 56 angle. So I couldn't put stuff on there which wouldn't be to the taste of what I assume the listeners of Claremont 56 have. It's a bit more electronic than I might have done normally. In some ways it's a bit more of a commercial comp than I might have done normally, but what you have to bear in mind is that all the tracks on there are all things that I really like, so I haven't compromised in that way. There are things on there which I wouldn't have put on any other comp, but I'm glad to have the chance to put them on a comp. So it's a very satisfying project in that way. If there's one thing I don't like hearing, it's when people say vinyl is warmer. I think that's codswallop. You know, like when it comes to vinyl reproduction, it's actually such a hard thing to do properly, and there are too many variables to be so general. Me, I like a well-mastered CD. No crackles, no clicks, and you know, I'm just as happy with a good CD as I am with a good bit of vinyl, but I'm not someone into sort of, you know, playing the formats off against each other.
Right.
You know, they both have good and bad things about them.
Yeah, there are going to be grown men sitting in front of their laptops crying, hearing you say that.
Well,